The Brooklyn Park man accused of plotting a Brooklyn Park home invasion that resulted in the death of his ex-girlfriend has pleaded guilty to the crime. Eric Haynes pleaded guilty Monday to aiding and abetting first-degree murder. The plea came just before jury selection for his trial was set to begin. Zaria McKeever was shot and killed in November 2022 by a Brooklyn Park teenager who Haynes recruited to help carry out the crime. Court records show Haynes meant to go after McKeever's new boyfriend at his Brooklyn Park apartment, but it was McKeever who ended up getting shot and killed. Sentencing for Haynes is scheduled for April 12th. He's expected to receive a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years.
Today, we're diving into the heartbreaking case of Zaria McKeever, a 23-year-old mother whose life took a devastating turn in an act of domestic violence. Her story is a chilling reminder of how toxic relationships can spiral into unthinkable tragedy. Zaria's case is not just about a relationship gone wrong. It's about the terrifying consequences when love turns into control, jealousy, and obsession. Zaria was a young woman who had recently made the difficult but courageous decision to walk away from an abusive relationship. For many, this is a moment of empowerment and hope for a better future, but for Zaria, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. The person she once trusted, the father of her child, could not accept her newfound independence, and what followed was a series of events that would shatter the lives of those closest to her. As we look deeper into this story, it forces us to ask difficult questions about the nature of possessiveness and control in relationships. How does love become twisted into something dangerous? Zaria's case isn't just about one woman's experience. It reflects the terrifying reality faced by countless others trapped in the cycle of abuse, unable to find a safe way out. What makes this story even more unsettling is the psychological unraveling that can occur when someone feels like they've lost control. Zaria's journey from hopeful young mother to victim of domestic violence is a tragic reminder of the consequences of unchecked rage and manipulation. In this story, we confront not just the crime, but the warning signs that often go unnoticed and the harsh reality that leaving isn't always enough to guarantee safety. This case unveils the darkest side of human relationships, where love, fear, and danger intertwine in the most devastating way. Prepare yourself, because this is one story that will stick with you long after it's over.
A woman still in shock after her sister's tragic murder.
That is just so messed up that this is her story, you know?
Police said that she was killed inside her Brooklyn Park home this week. 2 teenagers are among those charged in her death. And as WCCO's Alan Henry reports, the victim's sister thinks that she died protecting someone else.
Pure evil and jealousy, that's what led to it.
Tiffany Epps says Monday was a typical day, with one exception.
Zaria McKeever's life was cut short in one of the most horrific and senseless ways imaginable. A crime so brutal and terrifying that it could have been ripped from the pages of a psychological thriller or a true crime horror story. But this was no work of fiction. This was the horrifying reality that unfolded on a cold November night in 2022, a nightmare from which her loved ones will never awaken. Zaria was more than just another tragic statistic. She was a vibrant woman, a loving mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She had her whole life ahead of her, filled with hopes and dreams. All of that was stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty that left an entire community reeling in shock. At just 23 years old, Zaria was at a crossroads in her life. She had found the courage to end a toxic relationship with a man who would ultimately become her killer, Eric Haynes, the father of her 1-year-old daughter. Like so many young women, Zaria had dreams and aspirations. She was a talented makeup artist and loved to draw, pouring her creativity into every aspect of her life. She was beginning to carve out a path to independence after breaking free from the suffocating grip of a relationship that had turned from passionate to poisonous, a relationship that had become nothing short of a living nightmare. Her story, like so many stories of intimate partner violence, began with love and hope, a dangerous, intoxicating mix that quickly turned toxic. Eric Haynes' affection for Zaria twisted into a dark obsession, a desire to control her every move. And when he lost that control, that obsession metastasized into something even more sinister, a murderous thirst for revenge. What happened to Zaria is not an isolated case of domestic violence. It is a haunting chapter in a larger, insidious story that affects millions of women worldwide.
A woman still in shock after her sister's tragic murder.
That is just so messed up that this is her story, you know?
Police said that she was killed inside her Brooklyn Park home this week. 2 teenagers are among those charged in her death. And as WCCO's Alan Henry reports, the victim's sister thinks that she died protecting someone else.
Pure evil and jealousy, that's what led to it.
Tiffany Epps says Monday was a typical day, with one exception.
Me and my sister went somewhere and her child's father was following us.
It was just after 2:30 on Tuesday morning that Brooklyn Park officers were dispatched to these apartments on a possible home invasion. When they arrived, they found 23-year-old Zaria McKeever shot multiple times.
Police say this man, 23-year-old Eric Haynes, McKeever's ex, had been harassing and following her for weeks.
She was better in her life, and she knew that he was a downfall, and he was, part of the reason why things were going the way they were for her.
Police say Haynes admitted to buying a gun and giving it to 2 teenagers. He told them to break in and beat up the victim's new boyfriend while he waited in the car.
In the beginning, Zaria and Eric's relationship appeared promising, like so many tales that begin with charm and romance, only to descend into a twisted game of control and power. They shared a child together, and for a while, it seemed as though they were building a future. But as Zaria grew more confident and started reclaiming her independence, Eric's insecurities turned to a boiling rage. He became like a shadow that stalked her, a dark presence that loomed over every aspect of her life. His jealousy transformed into an unrelenting obsession, and his obsession into a terrifying need for control. Eric Haynes became the embodiment of the classic abuser, driven by a toxic mix of possessiveness and entitlement. He was everywhere she turned, a constant reminder that her freedom was a threat to his fragile ego. Zaria's family would later recount how he would follow her and her sister Tiffany around town, always lurking, always watching. It was as if he couldn't bear the idea that Zaria had moved on, that she had found the strength to leave him behind and start over. His jealousy was a corrosive force, eating away at him, morphing into something far darker than mere anger. This wasn't just about being possessive. The psychology of intimate partner violence often boils down to one terrifying need: control. Men like Eric Haynes often feel powerless in other areas of their lives, and they try to reclaim that power by dominating those closest to them. Research shows that abusers frequently grapple with feelings of inadequacy and low self-worth, and they mask these insecurities through coercion and control. When Zaria broke free from his grasp, it wasn't just a breakup to Eric, it was an existential crisis. He saw her independence not as a healthy decision, but as a direct assault on his identity. To him, losing her meant losing himself. The breakup sent Eric Haynes spiraling down a path of madness. He became consumed by thoughts of Zaria with someone else, thoughts that ignited a firestorm of rage within him. In his twisted mind, if he couldn't have her, no one could, and so he began to plot, a diabolical plan that would culminate in one of the most horrifying acts of domestic violence imaginable.
If you see signs, if you notice things, if you get vibes about people, literally, start calling police and making reports and protect yourself by any means, because you never know what could happen.
Alan Henry, WCCO 4 News.
Prosecutors charge Haynes and the 2 juveniles involved in the shooting with murder. Haynes' bail is set at $1 million. He is in court next week.
As Zaria tried to pick up the pieces of her life and move forward, Eric was scheming in private, plotting his ghastly revenge. But this wasn't just about hurting her emotionally. Eric Haynes wanted to obliterate the life she was trying to rebuild. And on that fateful night in November, his sick plan came to life in a way that no one could have anticipated. But he didn't have the guts to do it himself. Like a puppet master orchestrating a play, Haynes stayed in the shadows, pulling the strings from afar. He enlisted 2 teenage boys, young men whose lives would also be destroyed by this night of horror, to do his dirty work. He gave them them a gun, like an executioner handing over his weapon, and laid out his chilling instructions. Break into Zaria's Brooklyn Park apartment and attack her new boyfriend. Eric, the coward that he was, would wait outside in the car, safely detached from the carnage he was about to unleash. But as with so many crimes born from a frenzy of emotion and obsession, things did not go according to plan. The teenagers, likely caught between fear and adrenaline, entered the apartment in the darkness of the night. Their hearts must have been pounding in their chests as they stepped deeper into the apartment, crossing an invisible threshold from which there would be no return. Inside the apartment, Zaria was alone, blissfully unaware of the horror about to descend upon her. She was likely winding down for the night, perhaps thinking of her daughter asleep in the next room, or planning for the next day. When she saw the intruders, she probably didn't scream or panic. Zaria was the calm and collected type. She may have tried to reason with them, tried to appeal to their humanity, tried to diffuse the tension before it spiraled out of control. She knew these boys. Perhaps she thought she could save herself, save them all from the madness of that moment. But no amount of calm words or reasoning could stop the nightmare that was about to unfold. A gun was drawn, the trigger was pulled, and in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The deafening sound of gunfire shattered the stillness of the night, echoing off the walls. Zaria was struck multiple times, bullets ripping through her flesh, ripping apart her dreams, and scattering them like broken glass. Blood splattered across the walls, a gruesome testament to the horror of that moment, and her body crumpled to the floor, her life extinguished in an instant. What thoughts raced through her mind in those final, agonizing moments? Did she think of her little girl, just a room away, blissfully unaware of the nightmare happening just beyond her door? Did she think of her family, her sister Tiffany, and all the moments they had yet to share? We will never know for sure, but what we do know is that Zaria died alone, in the home she had hoped would be her sanctuary, her dreams brutally cut short by a senseless act of violence born of jealousy and rage.
So you found someone that was dumber than you, and you had them do this. Now all you guys' life are ruined. You guys ruined our lives, took her away from us and her daughter. Like, it's crazy. All for what?
It's unclear why her sister was the one killed, but Epps has a theory.
Knowing her, she thought she could defuse the situation because she knew the guys. They were her baby dad's friends.
Epps is hoping her sister's story saves someone else.
When the police arrived, they were met with a scene straight out of a horror film. Zaria's lifeless body lay on the floor, her blood staining the carpet, evidence of the horrifying violence that had taken place. Her 1-year-old daughter was still in the apartment, unharmed but forever marked by the trauma that would shadow her life. She was blissfully unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded, a small mercy in a night filled with darkness. For Zaria's family, the news of her murder was like a sledgehammer to their lives, a devastating blow that shattered their world. Tiffany, her older sister and best friend, would later recount how they had spent nearly every day together, sharing laughter, secrets, and dreams for the future. Now all Tiffany had were memories, pictures, and videos, fragile remnants of a life that had been stolen. The psychological toll of losing a loved one to violence is a nightmare in its own right. Studies show that families of homicide victims often experience symptoms akin to PTSD, nightmares, flashbacks, and overwhelming feelings of guilt, anger, and helplessness. For Zaria's family, the trauma was magnified by the unbearable knowledge that her death could have been prevented. Haynes's obsessive behavior had been escalating for weeks, an ominous warning sign that had gone unheeded.
A life taken too soon. A 23-year-old Brooklyn Park woman shot and killed over what her loved ones say was an act of pure jealousy and hate. Investigators say the ex-boyfriend of 23-year-old Zaria McKeever recruited 2 teenagers to help him beat up McKeever's boyfriend. Instead, McKeever ended up shot and killed. 22-year-old Eric Haynes of Brooklyn Park is charged with second-degree murder.
This is the haunting question that echoes through the halls of every true crime story. What drives someone to commit such a monstrous act? How does a person go from professing love to plotting a cold-blooded murder? Psychologically, the factors that drive intimate partner homicide are complex and deeply rooted in twisted notions of love, possession, and control. In the case of Eric Haynes, his jealousy and obsessive need to dominate were clear catalysts. specialists, but there's more lurking beneath the surface. According to research from the American Psychological Association, individuals who commit intimate partner homicide often display traits of narcissism and possessiveness. They do not see their partners as independent people with their own agency. Instead, they view them as possessions, objects to be owned, controlled, and ultimately destroyed if they try to break free. When a partner attempts to leave or assert independence, the abuser interprets it as a direct threat to their identity and ego. In their twisted minds, the only way to regain that lost control is through violence. This mentality is further fueled by societal norms that often condone or excuse male violence, especially in the context of intimate relationships. The idea that, if I can't have you, no one can, is a chillingly common motive in cases of intimate partner homicide, a mentality that reduces the partner from a human being to a mere object to be possessed or destroyed. Eric Haynes fit this profile to a terrifying degree. His actions were not just those of a jealous ex, they were those of a man whose sense of self had been so wrapped up in his control over Zaria that he viewed her departure as an existential threat, and like many abusers before him, he chose to reclaim his power through an act of irrevocable violence.
According to the criminal complaint, Haynes had been threatening and harassing the victim for weeks leading up to her death. McKeever was shot and killed during the early morning hours on Tuesday at the Eden Park apartment complex. According to the criminal complaint, 2 teens had broken into an apartment where McKeever and her boyfriend were staying. The boyfriend jumped out of a second-story window to call 911. When police arrived, they found McKeever lying on the floor with a bullet wound to her lower abdomen. The medical examiner says she died of multiple gunshot wounds. The victim's ex-boyfriend admitted to buying the gun and giving it to one of the teens who fired the fatal shots, then helping the teens flee the scene.
The tragedy of Zaria's death is a haunting reminder that this nightmare scenario is not a rare anomaly. It's a devastatingly common reality. For Black women like Zaria, the risk is even greater. According to the Violence Policy Center, Black women are more than twice as likely to be murdered by a man than white women, and in most of these cases, the perpetrator is a current or former intimate partner. This staggering statistic lays bare the unique and terrifying vulnerabilities that Black women face in a society where their lives are often undervalued and their safety overlooked. Systemic issues like poverty, racism, and a lack of access to resources compound these dangers. Many Black women hesitate to report abuse to authorities due to a historical mistrust of law enforcement and the all too real fear that their concerns will be dismissed or ignored. This mistrust is not unwarranted. Studies have shown that Black women who report domestic violence are less likely to receive adequate support from the police and legal system. In some cases, their reports are dismissed altogether, leaving them even more vulnerable to further violence. Zaria's story is a brutal reminder of these issues. Her murder could have been prevented if someone had intervened when Haynes's behavior began to escalate. If the warning signs had been heeded, if her cries for help had been met with action, she might still be here today, living her life, raising her daughter, and pursuing her dreams.
Tonight, the family of Zaria McKeever leaning on one another and turning to prayer after a painful day in court. The man responsible for Zaria's death, her ex-boyfriend, was sentenced today. McKeever was killed in her Brooklyn Park apartment in 2022. Her family says they've been fighting for justice ever since.
We are tired. We're very weary, but we're not by far stop fighting
or giving up.
So now we turn to Zanae. Zanae becomes the most important thing to give her everything that she needs.
As the reality of Zaria's murder settled over her family, friends, and community, a haunting question began to echo. Could this have been prevented? The answer, in part, is yes. Intimate partner violence rarely comes out of nowhere. It builds over time, with warning signs that often go unnoticed or unacknowledged. There were signs that Eric Haynes was a ticking time bomb, a jealous, controlling partner whose behavior was growing increasingly erratic. But as is often the case, those signs were either ignored, dismissed, or downplayed, and the result was a senseless tragedy. Experts agree that one of the most dangerous times for a victim of intimate partner violence is right after they leave their abuser. This period is often marked by an escalation in threats, stalking, and violence as the abuser attempts to regain control. For Zaria, this risk became a deadly reality. Her decision to leave Eric was a brave and necessary step towards reclaiming her life, but it also put her in the crossfire crosshairs of his twisted need for control and revenge.
Zaria's murder is a devastating case of domestic homicide.
According to investigators, Zaria McKeever was killed when Eric Haynes, her ex-boyfriend and father of her daughter, recruited 2 teenagers to break into an apartment and kill her new boyfriend. Fresh court documents filed Friday naming 2 new suspects, Haynes' sister, Ariana Dewana Haynes, and her boyfriend, Tavion Michael Darnell James, accusing them of working with Haynes on trying to cover up the crime and obstruct the investigation.
Zaria's murder is a single harrowing story in a much larger epidemic of domestic violence in the United States. The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey reports that more than 1 in 3 women in the U.S. will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. For Black women, the statistics are even more dire. Black women are disproportionately affected by domestic violence, and they are more likely to be killed by an intimate partner than women of other races. The emotional and physical toll of domestic violence is staggering. Victims often suffer from chronic health issues, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, and physical injuries that can have lasting consequences. They are also at a greater risk of homelessness, substance abuse, and even suicide. The trauma ripples out, affecting not just the victims, but also their families, friends, and communities, creating a cycle of pain and fear that is difficult to break.
The DA still appearing to double down on her earlier argument. The right person was charged with murder, and if convicted, he'll spend decades in prison.
Domestic violence requires a strong and multifaceted response. Part of that response must be aggressive prosecution.
What's more, Zaria's case is tragically reminiscent of other high-profile instances of intimate partner violence, where relationships marked by jealousy, control, and abuse culminate in lethal consequences. One of the most notorious examples is the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson in 1994. Nicole had left her abusive husband, O.J. Simpson, after enduring years of physical and emotional abuse. Much like Zaria, Nicole's decision to reclaim her life and independence infuriated her ex-partner, who was consumed by possessiveness and a need to control her. Though O.J. Simpson was acquitted of her murder in criminal court, the trial exposed the dangerous dynamics of abusive relationships that all too often end in tragedy. Nicole's case became a global symbol of the deadly consequences of domestic violence, just as Zaria's story echoes the same chilling reality. Similarly, the case of Riva Steenkamp, a South African model who was killed by her partner, Olympic athlete Oscar Pistorius, in 2013, highlights how intimate partner violence can escalate into murder. Pistorius shot Steenkamp through a locked bathroom door, claiming he mistook her for an intruder. However, the relationship was marred by jealousy and control issues, much like Zaria's relationship with Eric Haynes. These cases, along with countless others, show a disturbing pattern where abusers, unable to accept their loss of control, turn to violence as a means to reassert their power. Zaria's story is part of this larger, horrifying story of intimate partner violence, demonstrating the urgent need for intervention and awareness to prevent more lives from being lost in such senseless acts of brutality.
McKeever was murdered in November 2022 by a Brooklyn Park teenager who Haynes recruited to help carry out the crime. Court records show Haynes meant to go after McKeever's new boyfriend at his Brooklyn Park apartment, but it was McKeever who ended up being shot 5 times. During Friday's sentencing, family members described Zaria as a loving mother who gave selflessly to others.
We were always together, so it's like a part of me is missing. Zaria had so much life ahead of her. It was stolen out of pure hate, evil, and jealousy.
In the months following Zaria's murder, the wheels of justice began to turn, slowly and painfully. Eric Haynes was charged with aiding and abetting first-degree murder, a crime that carries the possibility of a life sentence. As the trial loomed, Zaria's family steeled themselves for the grueling ordeal ahead. They were determined to see justice served, not just for Zaria, but for every woman who has been a victim of domestic violence. In April 2024, Haynes pleaded guilty to the charges. For Zaria's family, family, it was a bittersweet victory. It brought some measure of closure, but it could never undo the horror of what had been done. "You guys ruined our lives," Tiffany said, addressing Haynes and the two teenagers who had carried out his deadly plan. "You took her away from us and her daughter. It is crazy. All for what?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with grief and anger, a raw expression of the pain that comes from losing someone so brutally, so senselessly. But justice, in this case, was only the beginning. The road to healing for Zaria's family would be long and fraught with pain. They now faced the unimaginable task of raising Zaria's daughter without her mother, a little girl who would grow up without ever truly knowing the vibrant woman who gave her life. They were determined to keep Zaria's memory alive, not just for her daughter, but for everyone who knew and loved her.
The mastermind in the murder of Zaria McKeever, Eric Haynes, was sentenced today to life in prison. This is the case that received so much attention when Governor Tim Walz took it away from Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty and gave it to Attorney General Keith Ellison. Haynes was McKeever's ex-boyfriend and the father of her young daughter. He admitted to stalking McKeever and then giving a gun to two young teens who kicked down her door and killed her. McKeever's family filed into the courtroom today and was satisfied with the sentence.
It definitely gave us a change of direction back to the route that we were headed in the first place. You know, the teenager got certified as an adult. Eric is serving life. So it's like we're getting the outcome that we were looking for at the beginning, and thanks to the Attorney General's office, for sure.
Zaria's death is a chilling reminder that we still have a long way to go in the fight against domestic violence. Her story should serve as a wake-up call to society, a call to action that demands we do more to protect women from the men who seek to control and destroy them. This means pushing for more robust education, awareness, and prevention programs, as well as addressing the systemic inequalities that leave women vulnerable to abuse in the first place. It means ensuring that all women, especially women of color, have access to safe housing, economic opportunities, and legal protections. Domestic violence is not just a personal issue, it is a public health crisis that requires a collective response. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 women in the U.S. will experience intimate partner violence at some point in their lives. This violence comes in many forms: physical abuse, sexual assault, emotional manipulation, and coercive control, and its effects are devastating, rippling out to affect entire communities.
My heart aches. I miss my daughter so much.
More than a year after the murder of 23-year-old Zaria McKeever in Brooklyn Park, the man who planned the crime learns his fate. In a tearful and emotional hearing, Eric Haynes, McKeever's ex-boyfriend and father of her child, was sentenced to life in prison Friday. Haynes confessed to the crime in a plea deal. McKeever's family says the murder of their daughter will live with them forever.
The defendant, Eric Haynes, infiltrated into our lives, our homes, and stole from us. He stole Zaria's life because of jealousy and anger. She didn't deserve to be killed, especially by her known assailant.
Zaria McKeever was more than just a victim. She was a bright, vibrant young woman whose life was cruelly cut short by the man who was supposed to love and protect her. Her story is a prime example of the dangers of intimate partner violence and the devastating toll it takes on families and communities. As we remember Zaria, we must also remember the millions of other women who are living in fear, trapped in abusive relationships with no way out. We must continue to fight for justice, for safety, and for a world where no woman has to live in fear of the person who claims to love her. Zaria's legacy will live on through her daughter, her family, and the countless lives she touched during her short time on this earth. But her death serves as a sobering reminder that we still have a long way to go in the fight against domestic violence. The time for change is now, and it is up to all of us to ensure that no more lives are lost to this insidious epidemic. We must stand together, speak out, and demand a world where women like Zaria are safe, valued, and free to live their lives without fear. Overall, Zaria's story is haunting, not just because of what happened, but because of how close to home it hits. She trusted understood Eric. They had shared so many moments, tenderness, love, and even the creation of a new life together. It's the last thing she would have expected, that someone she cared for so deeply, someone who was supposed to love and protect her, could turn around and take her life in cold blood. What makes this even more terrifying is how it forces you to confront a harsh truth. You never really know what's going on in someone else's mind. Zaria probably never imagined Eric was capable of such evil, but he was, and that's the scary part. If it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. Who's to say it couldn't be someone you know, or you? We never truly know what darkness someone is capable of until it's too late. Only time will tell. So, what are your thoughts on Zaria's case? What punishment should Eric face? Should the death penalty be in question? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.